Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 5 years studying Kytherian physiology and culture, but no amount of academic research had prepared him for the sound of a mother's desperate pleas echoing through the cargo bay of a hijacked transport vessel. The hegemony raiders had been efficient in their assault on the Serenity's Hope, overwhelming the civilian ship's minimal defenses within minutes and herding the passengers into holding areas like cattle awaiting slaughter. "Please," Zara whispered in accented standard, her voice breaking as she clutched her 5-year-old daughter against her chest. "She's only a child. Take me instead. I'll do whatever you want, but please leave Mila alone." The lead raider, a scarred Vaxillian whose chitinous exoskeleton bore the ritual markings of the slave cartels, laughed with the kind of cruelty that came from years of treating sentient beings as merchandise. "You don't understand, Kytherian. The little one is worth twice what we'd get for you." Young empaths are in high demand, especially when they're properly trained away from parental interference. Webb watched from his position among the other prisoners, his xenobiologist training allowing him to recognize the subtle signs of Kytherian distress that the raiders were ignoring. Zara's pointed ears were flattened against her skull in terror, while her daughter's empathic abilities were clearly overwhelmed by the emotional chaos surrounding them. The child's violet eyes were wide with shock, and she hadn't spoken since the attack began, a concerning sign in a species known for their verbal precocity. "The mother comes with us too," another raider added, checking information on a handheld scanner. "Diplomatic immunity markings. Someone will pay well for a former government official, even a refugee." "No." Zara's cry was raw with desperation as 2 raiders moved toward her. "You can't separate us. She needs me. Kytherian children can't survive without their emotional anchors." "That's the point," the lead raider replied callously. "Breaks them down faster, makes them more compliant. Economics, nothing personal." Webb felt something cold and furious building in his chest as he watched the raiders prepare to tear a terrified child away from her mother. His academic mind understood the economics they were discussing. Kytherian empaths were prized throughout the galaxy for their ability to sense and manipulate emotions, making them valuable as entertainers, counselors, or psychological weapons depending on their training. But his human conscience rebelled against the clinical treatment of a family's destruction. As the raiders reached for Mila, the little girl's control finally broke. Her empathic scream was silent to most species, but Webb's years of studying Kytherian neural patterns allowed him to feel the edge of her psychic anguish, a wave of pure terror and confusion that made his vision blur and his heart race with sympathetic panic. "Stop!" he called out, rising from his position among the prisoners before he fully realized what he was doing. "You can't take them." The lead raider turned toward him with amused contempt. "And why is that, human? You going to stop us?" Webb's mind raced, searching for any leverage he could use. His knowledge of interspecies law was academic rather than practical, but he'd spent enough time studying refugee protocols to know there were protections, theoretical ones, at least, for displaced populations. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, Terran Colonial Authority, Xenobiological Affairs Division," he said, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "These refugees are under official protection pursuant to the Kytherian Resettlement Accords. Any interference with their transport constitutes an act of war against the colonial authority." The raiders exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Webb's credentials were real enough. He did work for the colonial authority, though in a research capacity rather than any kind of enforcement role. But the slavers couldn't know that, and the legal complexities of interspecies refugee law were arcane enough that even pirates might hesitate before risking political complications. "You're saying these Kytherians belong to your government?" the lead raider asked, his tone shifting from casual cruelty to wary calculation. "I'm saying they're under official protection," Webb replied, stepping closer to Zara and Mila despite the weapons trained on him. "And any harm that comes to them will be considered an attack on colonial authority interests." It was a massive bluff, but Webb could see uncertainty creeping into the raiders' expressions. Slavers might be willing to attack civilian transports, but starting a war with a major human government over a handful of refugees was another matter entirely. "Show me your authorization," the lead raider demanded. Webb reached slowly for his identification tablet, grateful that his xenobiologist credentials included diplomatic access codes that looked impressively official to anyone not familiar with the colonial authorities' bureaucratic structure. Dr. Marcus Webb, Priority 7 clearance, assigned to Kytherian cultural preservation and integration oversight. The raider studied the credentials with obvious suspicion, but Webb could see the wheels turning in his head. The potential profit from 2 Kytherian slaves had to be weighed against the risks of antagonizing human authorities who might retaliate against the entire operation. Even if this is legitimate, the raider said finally, your authority doesn't extend to our vessel. These prisoners are our salvage from a civilian transport in neutral space. The Serenity's hope was carrying officially protected refugees under colonial authority escort, Webb replied, hoping his knowledge of standard refugee transport protocols was accurate. That makes this an act of piracy against government assets, not salvage of civilian property. Zara was watching the exchange with desperate hope, her arms still wrapped protectively around her daughter. Webb could see her violet eyes studying his face, probably using her empathic abilities to gauge his sincerity. He hoped she could sense that his protective instincts toward her child were completely genuine, even if his claimed authority was largely fictional. We'll need to verify this with our contacts, the lead raider said after a long pause. Put the Kytherians in separate holding until we can confirm the human story. No. Zara cried out. Please, I told you, she can't be separated from me. It will damage her psychologically. Webb stepped between the raiders and the mother and child, his heart pounding but his voice steady. The psychological welfare of Kytherian juveniles is specifically protected under colonial authority guidelines. Any treatment that causes deliberate trauma to a protected minor will result in enhanced penalties for the responsible parties. The lead raider's expression had shifted from amusement to genuine concern. Webb realized that his bluff was working not because the raiders believed him completely, but because they couldn't afford to be wrong. Attacking civilians was one thing, but interfering with official government operations could bring down the kind of retaliation that would destroy their entire organization. Fine, the raider said with obvious frustration. They stay together until we verify the human's authority. But if this turns out to be deception? It won't, Webb said with more confidence than he felt. I suggest you contact your legal advisors immediately. The sooner this misunderstanding is resolved, the better for everyone involved. As the raiders withdrew to discuss their options, Webb caught Zara's eye and saw gratitude mixed with desperate hope in her expression. Her daughter was still pressed against her chest, but Mila's violet eyes were now focused on Webb with the kind of intense curiosity that marked highly intelligent children. Webb realized that his bluff had bought them time, but time for what? He had no real authority to protect these refugees, and once the raiders verified his story with their contacts, they would discover his deception. He needed to find a way to turn his temporary advantage into something more permanent, or his intervention would only delay the inevitable separation of mother and child. But as he looked at Mila's trusting gaze and felt Zara's empathic gratitude washing over him in waves of warm relief, Webb knew he would figure something out. Some protections were worth creating, even when they didn't exist yet. The temporary holding area where the raiders had confined the disputed prisoners was a cramped storage compartment that smelled of industrial lubricants and fear. Webb found himself sharing the space with Zara, Mila, and 6 other Kytherian refugees whose fate now depended on how long his deception could hold up under scrutiny. Why are you helping us? Zara asked quietly, her violet eyes studying Webb's face with the intensity that marked her species' empathic abilities. Your emotional resonance suggests genuine concern, but humans rarely risk themselves for alien strangers. Webb looked down at Mila, who had positioned herself between him and her mother, apparently comfortable with his presence despite the traumatic circumstances. I've spent years studying your people's culture and biology. I know what separation trauma does to Kytherian children. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. You're the xenobiologist, Zara said, recognition dawning in her expression. I read your papers on Kytherian neural development. Your research helped establish the psychological welfare protocols for refugee children. You're familiar with my work? Webb asked, surprised. I was a cultural liaison with the diplomatic corps before. Zara gestured vaguely, encompassing the destruction of her homeworld and everything that followed. Your research was cited in the integration guidelines we developed for mixed-species communities. Webb realized that Zara's background made her far more valuable than just another refugee, and far more dangerous to the raiders if they understood what she knew. What kind of diplomatic work did you do? Intelligence analysis, primarily. I specialized in hegemony power structures and resource acquisition strategies. Zara's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I know how their slave networks operate, which officials can be bribed, which routes they use to transport prisoners. The implications hit Webb like a physical blow. That's why they want you alive. Not just for the slave markets, but for what you know about their operations. Exactly. And that knowledge makes me a threat they'll eventually decide is too dangerous to leave alive. Zara pulled Mila closer, her protective instincts clearly warring with her diplomatic training. Dr. Webb, your deception won't hold much longer. When they verify that you have no real authority over us, they'll kill you for interfering and take Mila anyway. Webb studied the other prisoners, mostly families with young children, all showing the signs of prolonged stress that came from being displaced and hunted. How long do you think we have? Maybe 2 hours before their contacts get back to them with verification requests. After that, Zara's empathic abilities were clearly picking up the emotional states of their captors, giving her insight into their intentions that pure observation couldn't provide. Mama, Mila spoke for the first time since the attack, her small voice barely audible. The angry man is coming back. Webb looked toward the door and heard approaching footsteps confirming the child's assessment. Kytherian children often developed precognitive flashes during times of extreme stress, their empathic abilities picking up emotional patterns before they became consciously apparent. Dr. Webb, Zara said urgently, I need you to know something. If they do separate us, if something happens to me, Mila has been exposed to classified information through our empathic bond. She knows things about hegemony operations that she's too young to understand but old enough to remember. What kind of things? Safe house locations, contact protocols, financial networks. The kind of information that could cripple their slave operations if it reached the right people. Zara's voice was steady, but Webb could see the fear in her eyes. They can't let her live if they discover what she knows. The door opened, and the lead raider entered with 2 guards, his expression suggesting that Webb's time was running out. Dr. Webb, we've initiated contact with our legal advisors. Preliminary inquiries suggest that your claimed authority may not be as comprehensive as you indicated. Webb stood, placing himself between the raider and the Kytherian family. I'm sure there are bureaucratic complexities that need to be resolved. These situations often require direct communication with the Colonial Authority's Refugee Affairs Division. Indeed, the raider replied with a smile that revealed too many teeth. Which is why we've requested direct verification from your superiors. We should have confirmation of your actual authority within the hour. Webb felt his stomach drop, but he kept his expression neutral. I'm confident that verification will support my position. I'm sure it will, the raider said, clearly enjoying Webb's discomfort. In the meantime, we've decided to begin preliminary processing of our cargo. Starting with the adults. Zara's empathic scream was silent but devastating. Webb felt the edge of her psychic anguish as the full implications of preliminary processing became clear. The raiders weren't just planning to separate families, they were planning to start the psychological breaking process that would make their prisoners more compliant. That violates the psychological welfare protections I cited, Webb said, his voice stronger than he felt. Only if your authority is legitimate, the raider replied. If it turns out you're just an academic with delusions of importance, then your objections carry no legal weight whatsoever. Mila stepped forward, her violet eyes fixed on the lead raider with an intensity that seemed unusual for a 5-year-old. You're afraid, she said in perfect standard, her empathic abilities apparently overwhelmed enough to bypass her usual shyness. "You're afraid of what will happen if you're wrong about him." The raider stared down at the child, clearly unsettled by her direct assessment of his emotional state. Kytherians were known for their empathic accuracy, and even hardened criminals found it disturbing to have their feelings read so precisely by someone so young. "Smart little thing," the raider said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "She'll fetch an excellent price once we've trained the defiance out of her." Webb felt something cold and dangerous building in his chest as he watched the raider study Mila like merchandise. His academic understanding of Kytherian trauma psychology merged with a very human protective instinct to create a resolve that surprised him with its intensity. "There's something else you should consider," Webb said, his voice carrying a new edge. "Dar. Marcus Webb isn't just my name, it's also my security clearance designation. If something happens to me during this verification process, the colonial authority will assume I've been eliminated to prevent testimony about hegemony war crimes." It was another bluff, but Webb delivered it with the conviction of someone who had nothing left to lose. The raider's expression shifted slightly, uncertainty creeping back into his features. "You're suggesting that harming you would trigger a military response?" "I'm suggesting that my disappearance would raise questions that might prove inconvenient for your operation," Webb replied. "Questions about how hegemony raiders knew to target a specific transport carrying protected refugees." The accusation hit its mark. Webb could see the raider processing the implications of potential information leaks within his own organization, the kind of paranoia that kept criminal enterprises profitable but unstable. "1 hour, the raider said finally. "We wait 1 hour for verification, then we proceed with standard processing regardless of your protests." As the raiders left, Webb realized that his second bluff had bought them a little more time, but not much. He needed to find a way to turn temporary delays into permanent protection, and he was running out of lies that might convince professional criminals to abandon a profitable operation. "Dr. Webb," Zara said quietly, "thank you for trying. But when the verification comes back negative, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll find a way to protect Mila, even if you can't save me. She's the future of our people, and she knows things that could save other families if she survives to share them." Webb looked down at the little girl who was watching their conversation with the serious expression of a child forced to grow up too quickly. "I promise," he said, and meant it completely. "But I'm not giving up on saving all of us yet." Webb's opportunity came sooner than expected, when a minor systems malfunction in the ship's environmental controls created enough distraction for him to access the maintenance panel hidden behind a loose wall plate. His xenobiology background included enough engineering training to understand basic life support systems, and he quickly identified the circuits that controlled atmospheric processing for their section of the ship. "What are you doing?" Zara whispered, using her empathic abilities to monitor the emotional states of their guards while Webb worked. "Creating a diversion," Webb replied, carefully adjusting the oxygen mixture to trigger the ship's safety protocols without actually endangering the prisoners. "When the atmospheric alarms start, they'll have to investigate. That's when we move." The alarms began wailing within minutes, filling the corridor outside their holding area with flashing lights and automated announcements about potential life support failures. Webb could hear guards running past their door, shouting instructions about emergency procedures and system diagnostics. "Now," he said, using an improvised tool to override the door's locking mechanism. "Stay close and follow my lead." The corridor was chaos, with crew members rushing between stations trying to isolate the apparent system failure. Webb led Zara and Mila toward the ship's communication array, hoping to send a distress signal before the raiders realized their prisoners were loose. "Dr. Webb," Mila whispered, her small hand gripping his tightly, "there are 3 guards coming. They're very angry." Webb looked back to see armed figures approaching through the confusion, their expressions suggesting they'd discovered the escape. "Zara, can you get us to the communications center?" "This way," she replied, her diplomatic experience with ship layouts allowing her to navigate the unfamiliar corridors. "But we need to move faster." They ran through passages filled with smoke from the environmental system's safety measures, Mila keeping pace with them despite her short legs. Webb marveled at the child's resilience. Most 5-year-olds would have been overwhelmed by the noise and confusion, but Mila seemed to be drawing strength from her mother's determination. The communication center was unguarded when they reached it, the crew apparently focused on the environmental emergency. Webb immediately began working on the distress beacon while Zara accessed the ship's internal systems. "I'm uploading everything I know about hegemony slave networks," she said, her fingers flying over the control interface. "If we don't make it out, at least this information will reach someone who can use it." "Mama," Mila said from her position by the door, "the angry man with the scars is coming. He has the big weapon." Webb looked up from the communication array to see the lead raider approaching with what appeared to be a military-grade pulse rifle. The man's expression suggested that subtlety was no longer part of his operational plan. "Back away from the controls, Dr. Webb," the raider called out. "Your verification came back negative. You're just an academic with no authority over these prisoners." "Maybe," Webb replied, continuing to work on the distress signal. "But I'm an academic who knows exactly what you're planning to do to a 5-year-old child." "What I'm planning to do is make a profit from valuable merchandise," the raider said, raising his weapon. "Your interference ends now." Webb stepped between the raider and the Kytherian family, his heart pounding but his resolve steady. "You'll have to go through me." "That can be arranged," the raider replied, his finger moving toward the weapon's trigger. The shot never came. Mila's empathic scream, audible this time, caught the raider off guard, and in that moment of distraction, Zara launched herself at the armed man with the desperate fury of a mother protecting her child. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as they struggled, filling the air with sparks and the acrid smell of burned electronics. Webb grabbed the raider's sidearm and found himself holding a loaded weapon while watching two people fight for their lives. His academic training had never prepared him for this moment, but his protective instincts toward Mila made the choice clear. The pulse from the sidearm caught the raider in the chest, dropping him instantly. Webb stared at the motionless body, his hands shaking as the reality of what he'd done sank in. "Dr. Webb," Zara said gently, her empathic abilities clearly sensing his trauma, "you saved our lives. You saved my daughter's life." "I killed someone," Webb said numbly. "You protected someone," Zara corrected. "That's what parents do. That's what family does." Mila approached him carefully, her violet eyes wide with something that might have been awe. "You fought the bad man for us," she said in her small voice. "Like Mama would." The comparison hit Webb unexpectedly hard. He looked down at the child he'd been willing to die for and realized that somewhere during this nightmare, she had stopped being a research subject and become something much more personal. "The distress signal went through," he said, forcing himself to focus on their survival. "Human patrol vessels should respond within the hour. And I've uploaded all the intelligence data," Zara added. "Even if the raiders kill us, the information will reach people who can shut down their networks." "Nobody's dying," Webb said with more conviction than he felt. "We just need to stay alive until help arrives." But as alarms throughout the ship indicated that the raiders had discovered their escape, Webb realized that survival might require more violence than his academic conscience was prepared for. The protective instincts that had driven him to kill one man to save a child were about to be tested again, and he wasn't sure he could handle what that might do to his sense of who he was. "Dr. Webb," Mila said quietly, "more angry people are coming. Lots of them." Webb checked the raider's weapon and found it still had enough charge for perhaps 6 more shots. Against lots of angry slavers, that might not be enough. "Zara," he said, "how long until the patrol ships arrive?" 20 minutes at least, she replied, her empathic abilities clearly tracking the approaching threats. "Maybe longer if they have to fight through the raider escort vessels." Webb looked around the communication center, noting the defensive positions and potential escape routes. 20 minutes was a long time to hold off professional criminals with superior numbers and firepower. "Then we make them pay for every minute," he said, surprising himself with the determination in his voice. "Whatever it takes to keep Mila safe." As the first sounds of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors, Webb realized that his academic career was definitely over. But looking at the trust in Mila's eyes and the gratitude in Zara's expression, he found he didn't care about his old life at all. The 20-minute siege of the communications center became the longest 20 minutes of Webb's life. Using Zara's empathic abilities to track the raiders' positions and Mila's precognitive flashes to anticipate their attacks, the three of them managed to hold off superior numbers through a combination of tactical knowledge and desperate improvisation. "They're trying to flank us through the maintenance shaft," Zara warned, her consciousness extending through the ship to monitor the emotional signatures of their attackers. "I can fit," Mila said immediately, understanding the tactical problem without being told. "I can stop them." "Absolutely not," Webb replied, but the 5-year-old was already moving toward the access panel with the kind of determination that reminded him powerfully of her mother. "She's right," Zara said reluctantly. "She's the only one small enough to reach the junction controls from inside the shaft." Webb watched in amazement as Mila crawled through spaces that would have been impossible for an adult, her small hands working with surprising dexterity to disable the circuits that controlled life support in the maintenance areas. The raiders attempting to flank them found themselves trapped in passages suddenly filled with sleeping gas from the ship's emergency systems. "How did she know how to do that?" Webb asked. "Kytherian children learn through empathic osmosis," Zara explained, firing the captured weapon at attackers trying to breach their barricaded door. "She's absorbed technical knowledge from every engineer and technician we've encountered during our travels." The final assault came when the raiders tried to overwhelm their position with concentrated firepower, but by then Webb had learned to trust the hybrid fighting techniques that their unusual partnership had developed. Zara's empathic awareness let them anticipate attacks, while Mila's technical skills allowed them to turn the ship's own systems against their captors. When the rescue ships finally arrived, they found the 3 survivors barricaded in a communications center surrounded by unconscious raiders and detailed intelligence data about hegemony slave operations that would prove invaluable to human military planners. "Dr. Webb," Captain Sarah Martinez of the patrol vessel Resolute said during the debriefing, "Your actions today saved not just these refugees but potentially hundreds of other prisoners who would have been taken by this network." Webb looked across the briefing room to where Zara sat with Mila on her lap, both of them wrapped in emergency blankets but safe. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Captain Martinez replied firmly, "you did what very few people would have had the courage to do. You put yourself between armed criminals and innocent victims without any backup or official authority." "What happens now?" Webb asked, though he was watching Mila more than the captain. The child had barely left his side since the rescue, apparently having bonded with him during their shared trauma. "Now we process the intelligence that Mrs. Zara provided," Martinez said. "Her information has already led to raids on 3 major hegemony facilities. The refugee networks you helped expose are being systematically dismantled." Zara looked up from comforting her daughter. "Captain, I want to continue working with Dr. Webb on refugee protection protocols. My empathic abilities and his xenobiological knowledge could be valuable for identifying and helping traumatized families." "The Colonial Authority has already made that offer," Martinez confirmed. "Dr. Webb, you're being reassigned to the new Kytherian Integration Program as Senior Coordinator. If you accept, you'll be working directly with refugee families to establish safe communities and integration protocols." Webb realized that everything he'd thought he wanted from his career had changed during those 20 minutes of protecting a child who had somehow become the most important person in his life. "I accept." 6 months later, Webb stood in the central plaza of New Haven Colony, watching as Kytherian and human children played together in the afternoon sunlight. The integration program had exceeded every expectation, creating a model community that was being replicated across human space. "Dr. Webb." Mila called out in perfect English, running toward him with a group of friends that included both species. "Look what I made in art class." She held up a drawing that showed 3 figures standing together, a tall human man, a Kytherian woman with pointed ears, and a small child holding both their hands. The word family was written across the top in careful block letters. It's beautiful, Webb said, kneeling down to her level. You're getting very good at English. Mama says I need to learn all the human words so I can help other families like you helped us, Mila replied seriously. She says that's what family does, we help each other. Zara approached, her own integration into human society having progressed remarkably well. Her work as an intelligence analyst had evolved into a position as liaison between refugee services and military protection units, using her knowledge of hegemony operations to prevent future attacks. Any regrets about leaving pure research behind? She asked, settling beside them on the plaza bench. Webb watched Mila return to her friends, her laughter mixing with the sounds of other children playing without regard for species differences. Research was about understanding Kytherian culture from the outside, he said. This is about being part of it. The new families arriving next week will need orientation assistance, Zara mentioned, her role as community coordinator keeping her informed about all incoming refugees. 3 more ships from the outer territories, including some children who've been separated from their parents. Webb nodded, his experience with trauma recovery having grown far beyond his original academic understanding. We'll need to pair them with established families immediately. The empathic bonding process works best when they have stable emotional anchors. Like we had, Zara said quietly, her violet eyes meeting his with the kind of understanding that had developed between them over months of shared work and gradually deepening connection. Their relationship had evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting vulnerable families rather than dramatic romantic gestures. Webb had learned to appreciate the subtle ways that Kytherian culture expressed affection, while Zara had come to understand human emotional patterns that didn't translate directly into empathic awareness. Dr. Webb, Mila called out again, this time approaching with a young human boy who appeared to be around her age. This is Tommy. His parents work at the spaceport, and he wants to learn Kytherian words. Can you teach him? Webb smiled at the easy way the children navigated cultural differences that had once seemed insurmountable to adult diplomats. I think your mother would be a better teacher for languages, but I can help with the cultural context. Will you tell him about the time you fought the bad men to save me and Mama? Mila asked with the kind of matter-of-fact pride that still made Webb's heart skip beats. Maybe when you're both a little older, Webb replied, ruffling her hair in the gesture she'd learned to interpret as human affection. As the children ran off to continue their games, Zara moved closer on the bench, her shoulder touching his in a contact that would have been impossible during their first meeting. She talks about that day as the moment you became her papa, she said softly. Webb felt warmth spreading through his chest at the casual use of the Kytherian word for father figure. And what do you call it? The day I learned that humans are capable of the same protective love that drives Kytherian parents, Zara replied. The day I realized that family isn't just about biology or species, it's about choosing to protect each other no matter what. Webb reached for her hand, marveling at how natural the gesture had become after months of learning to communicate across the gap between empathic and non-empathic consciousness. I never expected my life to change so completely. Change is what happens when we choose courage over comfort, Zara said, her empathic abilities allowing her to feel the contentment and sense of purpose that had replaced his old academic ambitions. You chose to protect strangers when it would have been safer to stay silent. That choice changed everything. A new transport was approaching the colony's landing pad, its hull bearing the markings of another refugee vessel. Webb could see families disembarking with the cautious hope of people who had lost everything but were willing to try building new lives in an unfamiliar place. Ready for another group of new families? Zara asked, rising from the bench. With you and Mila? Always, Webb replied, taking her hand as they walked toward the landing pad. As they approached the newest arrivals, tired, scared, but alive, Webb reflected on how far he traveled from the academic who had once studied Kytherian culture from the safety of research journals. His intervention during a desperate moment had evolved into a life dedicated to proving that protection and family could transcend the boundaries of species and biology. Mila ran ahead of them, already greeting the refugee children with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted that different species could become family. Her laughter echoed across the plaza as she began teaching newcomers the games that human and Kytherian children played together in their new home. Webb squeezed Zara's hand, feeling through their growing bond the same mixture of hope and determination that had driven him to step forward in that cargo bay 6 months ago. Some interventions, he had learned, didn't end with the immediate crisis. They began new chapters that proved courage was not a single moment of action, but a daily choice to keep protecting the people who had become worth protecting. "Welcome to New Haven," he called out to the arriving families, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought for the right to offer sanctuary. "You're safe here. We're going to take care of each other." And as Kytherian children with pointed ears ran alongside human children toward the playground where Mila was organizing games that required both empathic abilities and human imagination, Webb understood that some rescues created families that were stronger than anything biology alone could build.